Alright, it's stitching time. I'm using 1 mil braided polyester cord for this. Strong stuff. And what I like about polyester is it's more weather resistant than a nylon. Now, I have this needle is already locked on, and I'm going to go ahead and lock the other one on. The way I do that is I'll just put the thread through the eye of the needle, lay it on my work surface, go back an inch or so, and then pierce the thread with the needle. So it's like that. Pull that down, and boop. Needle's locked onto the thread. Needle is locked onto the thread. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start about 4 stitches back to go ahead and reinforce the opening here. Now the cord is strong enough, the thread, cord, whatever you want to call it, is strong enough to not need to be doubled over, but what doubling over does is it helps me to keep the cord pulled tight at this end, which, you know, just looks better. Doesn't really help it strength wise. You know, it does keep the end closed, but it's still plenty strong enough. Let me make sure my needles are still even. Yep. And what I'm doing is right here I'm stitching toward myself, so the needle goes in, I give it a little wiggle, second needle goes on top, then I turn it over, so now this needle's on the bottom, and the second needle goes under the first stitch. In other videos I talked about establishing the angle of the stitches and keeping that all the way up and down the stitch line so that both sides match, and it gives you a nice stitch line. In fact, let me show you one real quick. There you go. You can see how that stitch line angles there. Now, even though this is black on a relatively dark color and you won't really see that, still, I mean, even if I'm doing black on black, I like to do it that way because if you look close enough, you'll still see the stitches, and it's just good practice to do it the same way consistently every time. Now I'm going back against myself, sorry, away from myself, so the second needle, I put it on top, and then I turn it and it stays on top, and the second needle, oof grunt, goes over the first stitch, and that'll keep that angle consistent with what I've already done. Does it make a difference strength wise? Not really. But with leather work, the stitches are part of the aesthetic, and it keeps it pretty. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch on down to the end and do my back stitch when I get down there. But again, since I'm stitching away from myself, first needle goes in, second needle goes on top, grab both of them, so you have a little cross here, pull this thread back, put the second needle on top of the first thread, and I give it a little tug here to make sure I didn't pierce the thread. Pull it on through and give it a snug. You don't have to strangle it, just snug it. That'll be fine. Oh, and when I pull them tight, I don't pull on the end of the needle. As you've seen, I loop it around and I put it over my pinky and give it a little snug. That way, the thread's hanging loose and it's not pulling back against the needle. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do this. We'll be back. Okay, we're almost down to the end on this. Got a couple more to go. Still doing the same thing. Second stitch, second needle on top of the first stitch, all the way down this line. This is the last one here. And then we're going to do our back stitch. Now, one thing I like to keep handy when I'm doing my back stitch is a pair of flat nose pliers. Because sometimes I need a little bit of extra help pulling that needle through. Because by the time you get here and you start doing your back stitch, there's already thread in that hole, and that makes it more difficult. So I'll do the same thing I was doing before when I was stitching toward myself. Second needle goes under the first stitch. Give it a tug, make sure I didn't pierce the thread. Go. And pull it snug. And again, I'm not strangling it, I'm just snugging it. Leather's pretty tough. As long as you're using full grain, not just top grain. There are people that say that top grain's fine. I've used top grain just because it looks so much. It looked really nice. But I don't know if it was just a cheaper grade of top grain or what. But for me, it didn't work very well. It was kind of fragile compared to full grain. Okay, let's see. How far back am I? I'm 3. I'm going to do one more. How many do I do? 3 or 4 usually. I don't have a set formula for my back stitch. Yeah, just go back one more. Wiggle its way through. There we go. Alright, I didn't need pliers. Okay, pull both of these snug, and then I go ahead and cut them off. And I leave about, hope y'all can see that, about that much. Take my lighter, go ahead and melt the ends. And that's it. Stitch line is done. Next up, we got to go ahead and burnish these edges.